Call this meeting to order. Tonight, we're going to be led in the pledge by two students from Riverdale, Nadia Yoakley and Oriana McAdoo. Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to this special call meeting tonight. I know Mr. Odom and staff out here, he's had a committee that's been working on the differential pay pretty hard, so there's an awful lot to absorb here, and I believe Mr. Odom's going to do most of the presentation and have some staff do some of it, so I'm going to turn it over to you.
The Tennessee legislature around 2007 passed some bills relating to differentiated pay for teachers. It really wasn't acted on by the state board until this last year. And that mandate says now that every school system in Tennessee must submit a differentiated pay plan to be effective for the 2014-15 school year. So that's the guidelines that we're under. My suggestion to you this evening is that ask any questions you would like. We'll try our best. But there's some motions on there for you to look at because it has to be somewhat complex. There are the elements that we have to include in it. But my suggestion is that you not try to make a motion or vote on anything tonight. Wait until January. We must have it in by the end of January. So we've got a little bit of time to think about it. You can get feedback from teachers, from your constituents, give you a chance to ask us questions. Some questions may be related to finances or other things like that, so it'd give us a chance to get back with you and answer those questions. So that's one reason we wanted to go ahead and do it in December, to allow that time so we don't come in one night and just kind of be rushed through this process. So we've been involved. We were one of 33 systems in Tennessee that have been attending actually sessions with the state. They hired a consultant from really the Boston area to talk about this. It's been doing differentiated pay across the nation. But there's some very specific things, and we'll touch on this as we go through the plan tonight. But please just pause, stop me, ask some questions as we go through this. We'll begin with this one. And, of course, there's the code, Tennessee Code 493306. That's the one that was passed. Two or three elements here, and this slide was copied directly from the state slide. It's not something we created, so we just copied and pasted in the slide. But I did underline the second bullet there. No presently employed teacher will earn less than they are currently making, nor will new teachers make less than the current base pay. So it's kind of that hold harmless section of the law. So anything that we do could not take pay away from the teacher that pay they're already receiving. The other part is that we do have some flexibility. The next thing is some guiding principles. And this, again, is not something we created. This was pasted directly from the Department of Education, as part of a training that we went through. Two or three elements in this I'd like to point out. The first one that's in the bold print there: funding for differentiated pay plans shall not come at the expense of competitive base salary. Of course, one of the things that you face in the education world is teachers can choose where they want to teach. And so that's that competitive salary thing that we talk about. It's not uncommon for us to lose students to Williamson County, some other areas. If you might remember, a year ago, Metro Nashville was dealing with this, and they've raised their starting salary up to about $40,000 to try to get a chance to attract people. So one of the things that you have to think about is the competitiveness of your salary. So that we think about that. And then the other elements, there's a number of things in here that we could choose from that will suffice for a differentiated pay plan, and some things that will not. High-need schools, in this one here, can be something you could use. Any performance component shall not include numeric or percentage limits on the number of teachers, which means everyone that earns that, there's no quota system or anything. Everyone, whatever your criteria happens to be, everyone that reaches that criteria must receive the pay associated with that. Another piece here, which I think we need to remember, any performance compensation component of differentiated pay plan shall be based on effectiveness as recognized by board-approved teacher and principal evaluation criteria, and board-approved State Board of Education there in this case. So if you're going to use a performance compensation, it would have to be something associated with the Tennessee Value-Added Assessment System, or would have to be associated with the teacher evaluation system, teacher administrator, which is called TEAM, that we'll refer to in that. So you cannot create your own. It had to be something related to something the state has already authorized in prior sessions. The last one is something, again, is part of that thing that really is the one that makes the change. An across-the-board pay increase based solely on years of experience or education attainment, or one that provides additional compensation for additional work, shall not meet the requirements of the differentiated pay plan. We will have to submit the plan that's finally we vote upon to the state, and then they will say whether they accept it or not. Basically, if we include certain criteria, they say they will accept it. But if we just, for all the years, most of the years, it's been solely based upon experience and degree, and they're saying they will not approve it if that's all your pay plan has. So you've got to include some other element in it. So let's talk about that. And this is a slide that we created here. Some other considerations. One that we have to think about, it must be sustainable. We already know that every person qualifying has to receive it, but we have to be able to fund it. The second thing that they've told us multiple times, primarily revenue neutral. And I can tell you, if the state is not going to be sending us as much money, part of this is a shift of cost of education from the state level to the local level. I mean, it's obvious when you stop and take a look at it, with the state not paying for any degree above a master's and not paying above 11 years, that's a step back. So obviously the things that you look at tonight, we have to, from what it would have been, you have to begin to take away some things to make it revenue neutral. If we add things back in beyond what the state says they're going to fund, there has to be some offset. So on the front end, just being as brutally honest as we can, that's what we have to measure. What can we make the adjustments to make it revenue neutral? If it's not revenue neutral, it has to come out of local funds. That's your local property tax. I think one of the things that we know this next year is election year, and tend not to be additional monies come from the local tax in those years. So it's a very tough year to do that. So as we design this plan, another thing we have to think about. And of course the third one, the big one I've already mentioned, the state's removing increases for degrees above master's and step raises above 11 years. So that's one of the things that they've done. All right, some other things. Now, these are some of the things when I say definitions and discussion, and this is a slide that we shared with teachers. And we've done this as another slide. It'll kind of tell how we did this. But we've been to 3 schools. We've shown it to teachers. We did it to the Teacher Advisory Committee. And we gave them like 7 options that the state is talking about that we could use and let them rate it on a 1 to 5 scale. And you'll see that scale. One is a high-need school. The state said they would approve a differentiated pay plan if you include something for a high-need school. Now, in the state of Tennessee, in some areas, that's very important because you have those that were in the achievement school district, if you remember that term, in the lowest 5% of performing schools in the state. So this particular choice is designed for if you have schools that's in that lowest achievement across the state, then if you want to give a financial incentive for teachers to teach in that school, you may do so as part of a differentiated pay plan. Rutherford County does not have any schools in that 5%. We're not really close in that. So that one was not as attractive, yet it's one of the ones we looked at. High needs certification. For Rutherford County, we've had some in the past. Mathematics, physics is still very tight around the state because state of Tennessee graduated less than 10 people in physics. In fact, I think it was more like 4 or 5 last year in physics education across the whole state of Tennessee. Yet, the new requirement was part of the diploma project that every student who graduates from high school must have chemistry or physics. So, we have a real dilemma there. So there's a real shortage of that. Special education in the past, we're seeing a shortage of guidance counselors because of the way they have to go back now and obtain that guidance degree with their time in the classroom and all that's required. We're beginning to see shortage of those positions too. Another thing that you can use, individual Tennessee Value Added Assessment System, or TVAS growth scores. TVAS 1 to 5 growth scores. Some things that they suggested to us, you might want to give a bonus for levels 4 and 5, which is the highest areas. This is one of those areas that the state had approved. They said if you're going to use this, you've got to use something that we're already measuring. And one of them would be individual TVAS growth scores. The issue with this is about 42% is a figure I saw today. 42% of the teachers in Tennessee have a TCAP type test, and that's the elementary TCAP and the high school end of course. They did go back and pick up some first and second graders tests last year for some districts and that was something like 16%. But from the TCAP assessments, it's less than 50% of the teachers actually have a score that goes in this. The 4 is an overall effectiveness score, and that would be a composite of number 3, their value-added assessment, plus their administrator evaluation. And so that is that team evaluation, and it's the composite of the two. Another thing that they allowed us to do is extra duties and responsibilities. This is actually one of the ones that the people from Boston said produced some of the greatest results in student outcomes over some of the others. They said it was actually higher than paying teachers that may be 4 or 5s. And that was people who would directly impact student learning and positions that you could create in there to meet the needs of your individual students, such as interventionists, academic coaches, PLC team leaders, that sort of thing. And the last one we did include for our teachers' degree and experience. The state, again, has only provided funding up to a master's degree and at years 6 and 11. One of the things that concerned us as a committee as we talked about this, I'm very concerned about that new teacher starting out. That they've right out of college, maybe they have a student loan of several $1,000s. Maybe they're having to rent an apartment to live in. And, when they start out teaching and then the state says, well, you won't get a raise for till you get to year 6, there's a potential to lose people there. And across the nation, roughly 50% of the teachers leave in the first 5 years. That's not true in Rutherford County. I don't want that to be true in Rutherford County. So I think we have to look at a plan that helps compensate, especially some of the new people starting out, so that they can make it into this profession. It takes a little time. So that's one of the things that concerned us. So some of the opportunities for feedback. On October the 24th is when we met with the Teacher Advisory Committee to share these guidelines. We showed them some of the same slides you're seeing tonight. We asked them, and that's a representative from each school, that we meet at least a couple of times a year, and so they come in, they voted that day and ranked these from 1 to 5. What we did for them then is the next day, Ms. Michaels forwarded to them our PowerPoint presentation, and we sent them the voting form, and then we asked schools to take this again and with their whole faculties, do a faculty meeting, and then everybody mark it. Send that information in with your comments, and we read them, and you're going to see a summary of those. So when they sent that in, we compiled it for the entire district. On October 25th through November 15th, responses were submitted again from the TAC, when the TAC took it back, so over that period of time. November 18th, we had another meeting with just the principals to solicit feedback, to say, principals, do you see anything we're not thinking about in this, or can you think of other ways to include in this? So we had our administrators in. Then on November 18th, 25th, and December the 3rd, we had the open meetings for teachers. We started out with the first one, I believe, was at Central Magnet School, and then we had one at Stewart's Creek, and we had the last one at Siegel High School. And they started at 4:30 in the afternoon, giving teachers a chance to come. It was not particularly well attended. I would say all three together, maybe 60, maybe of actual teachers in all of our 2,800 that actually came to one of these meetings. But it was advertised multiple times and all for people to come to that. So here is the score. After we finished the TAC scores and the school sent us in their revision, we asked the teachers to rate this from 1 to 5, basically with 5 being one that should have the highest consideration. So the number one thing that the teachers wanted to see continued in some way was something to do with experience and degrees. Out of a 1 to 5 scale, that got 4.40 and was number one in rank order. Number 2, compensation for additional roles and responsibilities, 3.34, and that was number 2 in rank order. That would be things like the coaches and some other things. We actually totaled this. This is the composite for elementary, middle, and high. There were little variations that came between elementary and middle and high, but it really didn't occur till you got further down. So the first 1 and 2 basically stayed in there. Number 3, the third choice was certification in high-need subjects at 2.99. Assignment in a high-need school was a 4th place. Consideration of attendance patterns came in 5th for the teachers. The team effectiveness composite, which is the TVOS plus the principal's evaluation, was 6th, and the 7th choice, individual TVOS effectiveness score. So that was the ranking that the teachers basically gave this survey. Now, what was our goals as a team? So how did we go about this, the ones of us here at the central office? And the central office, again, the state told us to participate in this. They basically named. So I was on the team. The director had to be a part of the team. Mr. Sandvig in finance had to be. Your person in instruction had to be, and that was Mr. Zago. And a person in HR, if you had an HR, had to be part of the committee, so that was Ms. Barnes. And then we asked Trey Duke to fill out the team for us. So that was your team here that's been attending the meeting. We actually have another one this Wednesday dealing with it. And the one Wednesday is supposed to tell you how to roll it out to the public, but that's what we're doing now. So we're, I guess, a little ahead of that one. So our first thing was to incorporate feedback from the teacher survey and meetings. We did listen, and that's going to show up in the plan tonight. Develop a plan that supports compensation for effective teachers beyond the state salary schedule. You know, as we looked at it and heard from teachers, we didn't see how not doing anything for those beginning teachers, not doing anything above a master's degree, would be encouraging and something that would let us be competitive and to hang on to teachers that we have. So as we looked at this, we felt like we had to include some components for that because that was one of our goals. Develop a plan that attracts and retains new teachers using elements beyond the state salary schedule. We're still competitive with other districts. I mean, Wilson County over there told us at one of the meetings their goal was to try to get to a $40,000 starting salary, and they told us you have been getting teachers from us, you know, and so they're going to want to up their beginning starting salary to attract. So we have to pay attention to that. And then the last bullet, initiate compensation for duties and responsibilities that impact student performance, because we listened to the training and we said whatever we do, we want it to have an impact on student performance. That's why we exist as a student scorer. So that's another thing. So here's our plan. It's basically to get you a look at it. There's several steps. Number 1 is to include annual experience steps for all eligible teachers in years 1 through 11 beyond the state minimum salary schedule. Now remember, the state's only going to give it at year 1 and at year 6 and at year 11. You start out, you get 1 at 6 and 1 at 11. For the reasons I said a little bit before, to try to work with these teachers that are just beginning their teaching and trying to hold them in the system, we feel that we still need to build in some kind of an annual step raise in years 1 through 11. So our proposal will include that. Number 2, include experience step raises for all eligible teachers at years 16 and 21 beyond the state's salary schedule. Again, the state's going to stop at 11. Our suggestion is to build in the Rutherford County differentiated pay plan another increase for years at 16 and at 21. The old negotiated salary schedule, where the state was supporting it and all, we went through the 25th year. And now the difference here, in that when we talk about some things are subtracted in order to be able to do this, again, we don't have a raise for years 17, 18, 19, 20. It would come at 21, and the same between 11 and 16. So again, that's part of that trade-off that you're trying to do to have a neutral cost program. Okay, another thing that they spoke on very, very highly about and talked about a lot, teachers who have a team teacher effectiveness level, team is the principal's evaluation plus the TVOS, of 1 or 2 will not be eligible for the step increase in a specific year based on experience or degree. What this change does starts really 2 different systems. Teachers have years towards retirement, annual years towards retirement, and then they'll also will have to track effectiveness years. Now, as long as your average of 3, 4, or 5, those 2 numbers will match. Now, one of the things that you have to realize when the teacher effectiveness, they first said they weren't going to do this, but they came back in the team effectiveness score is a 3-year value-added score that goes, teacher effect score that goes in there. The number of teachers, or the percentage of teachers that we have that do not have a 1 or a 2, by the time when you include the principals, is like 1 to 2%. It's not very many at all that this impacts. But basically, we feel it's important that we need people that's scoring at least average 3, 4, 5, especially when you have a 3-year score in there for the teacher effect thing. So we've talked about that some before. Include a step for advanced degrees beyond master's. This would be EDS and educational or PhD combined at years 11, 16, and 21 for current teachers and teachers new to RCS. Now, this goes beyond the state. So this means that when we do this, if we're going to pay for EDS and for doctorate degrees, then that's local monies, basically is what we're saying, because the state's not going to do that. We still believe that there's some value in that and that it's very attractive to our teachers. Now, one of the things that we heard as we went to the teachers, we have a number of teachers who said, I've already spent several $1,000s working on my EDS. So when did y'all know about this? We didn't know about it till this fall when it was released. So you've got people that have invested time and money in another degree, and they've just been cut off, basically, from the state. So what we're particularly saying in this case, that we would like to do a grandfather. And that grandfather, we would like to, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. The step for a master's plus 30. The state, one of the paths that they eliminate is master's plus 30. And master's plus 30 could be 30 hours, it's 30 hours above a master's. We just believe that if we're going to compensate it, beyond the state salary schedule, that we need to make sure that the hours are in education courses or in your teaching area or something that would make you stronger for your teaching. So we're not going to recommend that Rutherford County continues paying the MS 30 track. But at 30 hours, if you'll apply for it and write your paper, you can get an EDS. So we're just saying that we would pay for those that choose to get this extra degree in the field of education or in their field of study, math or whatever it would happen to be. So we're limiting to that. And this will be a step no 30 will no longer be an option for new degree advancements after June 30th, 2014. And again, this would be a step beyond what the state is doing. Okay, the grandfather piece. Grandfather current employees who are actively enrolled no later than this fall, August to December 2013, and taking classes toward an EDS or educational doctorate with a program completion date of August August 2016. So what we're saying here, if you're in the middle of a program and you were signed up as of this fall, then we will grandfather you when you get that degree if you'll get it by August 2016. That gives them about 2 more years to complete it. And it usually takes 2 to 3 years. Teachers that teach all day wind up coming back in the summer and at night, time to do it. We recognize that. So again, we're not going to include any grandfathering clause for Masters Plus 30 after this year, after June 30th, after this school year. Now, how we're going to do this, that the employee is going to have to provide a letter from the university that gives their enrollment date because they've got to be currently enrolled, and their program of study, transcripts to verify active status working on that degree. So our recommendation to you will be that we give the people that are currently working on degrees until August of 2016 to complete that degree, and we'll grandfather them on that. Another thing that we're talking about, and this is what you're seeing here, is why I'm telling you that the motion includes so many parts. And you may want to pick and choose things out of the motion or change that motion. So that's another real reason why I ask you, let's not vote tonight, because there's too many questions that you may need to do. Teacher retirees who return to work on an interim up to a 120-day contract with a retirement date after the end of this school year will cap at 11 years of experience and appropriate degree on the proposed salary schedule. Teachers who retire before July 1st, 2014 will not be affected by this limitation. There have been a number of systems throughout the state that have only given 5 years experience or that sort of thing. We have been giving all of the experience, whatever you come in with. The issue again is we have to be able to sustain this without the state doing this. So we're saying basically, if you come in with 15 years experience, you haven't been one of ours, you're coming in, you're going to drop back to that 11 years of experience. Now then you can work towards your 16, but your starting salary would be at 11 years, maybe not the full amount. All right, the next bullet, new teachers or teachers returning to the system following a break in service will cap at 11 years experience and appropriate degree on the proposed salary schedule, which we're saying then that if you're a brand new teacher or if you've been out, if you retired, left us, gone somewhere else and come back, this 11-year cap will apply to you also. People with continuous service won't have this, but if you've left or something. Now, the law, military service up to 5 years is granted. That has to be included. And we've been including with CTE 5 years experience, and that'll still remain applicable. You'll have to include that part to whatever they have, because the military is required, basically by law. Okay, the next one is begin to address additional duties and responsibilities that focus on student performance outcomes. And the focus for 14-15 will be the RTI squared, which is called Response to Intervention for Tennessee. Coaches, as we begin full implementation of state-mandated RTI square framework. Since I've been director, I really have not made many changes to our organizational structure. We did a little bit with Mr. Duke as we changed that. But this will be one of the first major changes that will deal with some structural changes of people and what their assignments might be. It's directed towards student achievement, that we can put people in there to assist teachers, administrators, and all to meet the mandated RTI, plus make a difference in our students. So the other caveat at the bottom, additional salary schedule considerations such as performance level and attendance can be incorporated. Our recommendation is to review these and other considerations in subsequent years based on funding, legislative action, Tennessee Department of Education requirements, focus on school system priorities, and a competitive salary structure. The state is dropping basically their salary schedule. There's no longer a state salary schedule other than a base, which you're going to see. So this may become an annual thing as you come back and look at it. Now, one reason we add that caveat, you may have read over the paper this weekend, I talked about when our legislators attended a session, I believe, in Smyrna. Representative Womack said he was going to introduce some bills that would not tie teacher performance to, evaluations and some other things. So Some of the things that we have in this plan, the legislature could change. And if they do, and it's active, we'll have to address it. Tonight we're addressing the playing field that we're on right now. I mean, that's all we can do. The one we have to submit by the end of January, that we'll have to submit to the state. So it's got to include some of these things that we're talking about. So whatever changes the legislature, if any, choose to make, we'll obviously have to come back and adjust, if they make this. Any particular questions up to where I am right now? It's overwhelming almost, isn't it, when you kind of look at it with the possibilities. Okay. I'm going to ask Jeff Sandvig to step up, and we're going to do a shift, and you'll get to see the salary schedule that we are proposing, and this may bring on some additional questions. Jeff?
Okay, this is the new state minimum salary schedule. Went into effect July 1st of 2013. We found out about it right around that time, after the budget had been prepared. As Mr. Odom said, for a person with a bachelor's, there is a $570 raise after your first year. A teacher's first year is year 0. They have no experience. The blue numbers on the salary schedule, pages 2 and 3 that I gave you, those are the state minimum salary schedule numbers. You don't have to look at them now, but...
Do you kind of understand, before we had all these tracks. You had a bachelor's track, you had a master's track, you had an MS-30 track, you had an EDS track, you had a PhD or doctor's track. State had all of those. They boiled it down to this. And it all goes back to that base. And that's how much you would add for those steps at years 1 and in year 6 and in year 11. And it kind of freezes from the state, at that particular point. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. Yeah. And if we do anything different, then that's up to us to provide. So you can kind of see what the state's doing in this particular case.
Yeah. And then if you have a master's or higher degree, that second line of numbers applies, where you would make $3,415 more than if you just had a master's when you started teaching. And that is the state minimum now. Now, as Mr. Odom mentioned, none of our teachers can drop below what they are paid this year. But we could freeze every one of them. The state had us go through an exercise of that, which was interesting.
We haven't been paying the state minimum salary schedule anyway.
Yeah.
For a number of years. You as a board have not
Right.
been on the state minimum
No.
because of our competitiveness and the desire to attract teachers and reward the performance of teachers. So we haven't paid the state minimum for years. So our proposal will not be the state minimum, obviously, too. So
But this is what they came
this
out
is what they presented.
Okay, this is page 2. Anyway, again, the blue numbers are the state minimums. The column next to the state is our local supplement. I split it into 2 halves. These would be our ongoing degrees: bachelor's, master's, EDS, or EDD, the new degrees, or new employees for that category. We do still have some increases between years 12 and 15. In coming up with this, I had to look at relative increases between our different degrees as we currently have them and the different years. It will be a multi-year transition to go to have a step at year 11 and then a year at step 16. And then a step at year 16. That'll take several years as money flows through. But this is where we would start, and this is only a draft. We had to have something to work with. I will have to have something to build our budget structure on. And the next page shows our frozen or our grandfathered degrees, our master's plus 45 quarter hours, 30 semester hours, our existing EDS degrees, and our existing doctoral degrees. Again, the blue numbers are the state minimum.
And when you look at that column that says state, you can see where it's frozen.
Yeah.
And that is because it's the same number, extends down. So in those steps, that is where it's frozen.
Now, the result of the state dropping their minimum and recalibrating, rolling money over into our local supplement is end of 2013, we paid, the local portion of our highest degree, a doctorate with 25 years, was $9,360. It is now $22,509. The bottom right-hand corner in the blue column. That shift is why we do recommend doing we think we have to do some kind of freezing on
Pardon me,
that.
I'm sorry. Say those numbers again and
They're-
reference them,
okay.
because
And
I'm looking for your
Okay.
pointer.
okay.
Okay, there.
Okay. I have trouble seeing this pointer.
I got
That 22,509
Yeah.
on page 4 of the salary schedules, it's not blue, but the bottom right-hand corner column to the left of the 64,275,
Yeah.
that was 9,360. There's been just over a $13,000 shift from the state salary schedule to the local on that particular degree.
Do we have a comparison to show the local dollars now versus after this point?
Pages 4 and 5
Okay.
show it before and after, which is why I put those in if you wanted to look at it. But the shift was most pronounced with more experienced teachers and the higher degree, naturally. And again, this is why we think we do need to do something to take care of our current employees, but when the state has shifted that much money away from those higher degrees and that higher experience, we believe long-term, intermediate term, we're going to be kind of forced into a similar structure to some degree because of state funding long-term.
Let me say something about this too. Jeff made this projection. Now, if the legislature comes across this year and changes, the governor said he wanted Tennessee to be one of the fastest growing teacher salaries in the state. Jeff's built in about 1% here, expectation from the state. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So what if the state were to come along and give more or something, then that could change your numbers slightly.
Right.
Go back to that calculation of the base as the state changes the base. And that would be true even for teachers who might be in between years, say, 12 and 15 until they get to 16. If the state in a given year changes that base, then there could still be a raise, even though it's somewhat frozen from the
Right.
state. If the base changes, then that trickles down
Yeah.
through the other positions. So
Yeah.
that caveat, I just want you to
Yeah.
realize that as we go through and
Yeah.
talk about this.
And I met with the state folks at our TASBO conference 3-4 weeks ago. No one would commit to anything. No percentages, I don't know if they had any, I'm sure they had been in some discussions, but they would give no hint. The only number eventually they kind of moved towards, since the overall raise was 1.5% last year, they talked about 1.5%, but they were clearly referring back to last year. We don't anticipate a bunch of money coming in. Okay. And then our freezing proposal, these local steps that you see in each column, we would just freeze the dollar volume of them. If you were I'll, I'm sorry, I have, okay. I'll go over to the masters, our current masters plus 45, year 12. Right about middle of the page, the local supplement is $13,097. We would freeze that. Now, when you went to year 14, your local supplement would go up to $13,842. But if we had a 2% raise, we would not apply it to the local supplement on these degrees. The dollar values would stay as they are. Eventually, and I don't know about fairly quickly, the first one, basically, at some point, our masters plus 45 would come to equal our masters at some point down the road. And we'd slowly be moving people off as the dollars catch up. We don't know any guidance or restrictions we'll have from the state. Last year, they kind of advised us against doing an across-the-board raise with that 1.5%. But with the insurance increase we had last year, a year ago January, and the one we faced this January, we wanted to pass it all on to the teachers. We will just have to see how it goes in the future, what guidance, what restrictions they put on us. So these are the draft salary schedules we've been presenting. Again, the state salary schedule has 2 levels, bachelor's and a master's and higher. Our draft, we have bachelor's, master's, and combined EDS or EDD for new employees, new degrees that aren't grandfathered. We would maintain 3 grandfathered levels for our current employees with Masters plus 30 or 45, EDS, EDD, and those who are grandfathered because they're already enrolled. On the step raises, as Mr. Odom said, the state, if you're a bachelor's, you get 1 at year 1, and then 6 and 11. For a master's, you get 1 at year 6 and year 11. We have kept local state raises years 1 through 11. We still have some between 12 and 15, but those would bleed out as we have increases flow through. And we have built in step raises for years 16 and 21.
Any questions on this?
We have that concern that this will, probably not this year, it may be intermediate term, but we think there will be downward pressure, or we're not convinced there won't be downward pressure on the state funding factor for teachers as this flows through. Again, that's one of those questions when I asked, I couldn't get answers from anyone. I don't think the intent at this point is that, but it could turn into that.
As we met with teachers in those 3 sessions and with the TAC people in this room, you know, as they looked at this, I mean, they knew, it's obvious that the state's saying nothing but at that magic 1, 6, and 11, nothing above masters. People generally left and said, we know it's not what you're doing. We know it's coming from the state, but they were generally appreciative that we were stepping out to put more of those annual increases up to 11, that we were extended beyond to another degree line, and that we were also looking at something again at 16 and 21. So again, and Jeff is running the financials for this, but basically what you're trying to do is it's got to be somewhere near revenue neutral. And so you absolutely have to make changes in order to make that happen.
And keeping it a sustainable schedule. Mr. Odom and I have talked about that. It has come up at our meetings. The difference between the old and the new local supplements. when I consolidated all of this together in this year's budget file, it shifted 5.5% of our overall teacher pay from the state, being generated by the state portion of the salary schedule, to being generated by the local. Raises, 1.5%, 2% in these days of lower inflation have been good. We've seen some years without any raise through the state. So, this is probably 3 or more years.
Jeff, what
Total
percent
shift.
roughly of the Rutherford County Schools budget is personnel?
Personnel and benefits, just about 80%.
So you see what we're talking about. It's most of your, of course, they are classified in that too, but roughly 80% of your budget. And you see this every year when we get to budget time, that you just do not have great amounts of flexibility when we do this. So you're talking about the majority of your budget when you're looking at some kind of a salary structure.
So, but on the handout with the salary schedules, I did put a brief explanation of what each page is. And if give me a call, send me an email, whatever, and I'll do my best to answer any questions.
Do y'all have another question for Jeff at this time?
I guess one question I'd have, Jeff, and you talking about percentages and everything, as far as real dollars, what are we talking about?
This,
Shift on all this.
if to fund this salary schedule in the 2014-15 budget, with all the unknowns we have at this point, my estimate was 1.3 million, which again, if the state has some raise in teacher pay, and we don't get all of that funded, we have to do a lot of match on it. It should be a doable number. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, the next step is, you remember that another thing that they said it included, you could have coaches or interventionists or something else that would impact student performance. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Zago and Mr. Trey Duke to step up to see what our proposal is for do some restructuring to assist teachers with RTI Square, let you kind of quickly begin to understand what it is and how that might benefit our students and enhance the teaching performance. So, Mr. Zago, Mr. Duke.
Trey and I, Ms. Duke and I are going to talk to you a little bit about RTI Square, and let me explain what that is. And many people do not know. It's response to instruction and intervention. That's the RTI Square, intervention and instruction. It's basically 3 tiers, and if you look at the sheet that we have, it's a colored sheet like this one, and you see an upside down triangle or pyramid, you'll see Tier 1 at the top, and I'm going to give you the layman's term of Tier 1. It's every student that enters the building. When you come through that front door, you're a Tier 1 student. When they're out beside that, you'll see 80 to 85% of the students are Tier 1. That's 80 or 85% of the students will never be Tier 2 or Tier 3. But 100% of all students are in Tier 1 instruction. That's your base general classroom instruction. Tier 2 is 10 to 15% of the students. Those are students that have small skill deficits. When we're assessing students, we find they have this hole, and we fill that hole through the professional learning community process. Tier 3 is a little bit more intensive. That's a student that has groups of skills or missing many areas of instruction over their previous school career. So those students are receiving a more intense instruction on top of Tier 2. And I'm going to go back and explain just a couple of things. Tier 1, every child receives. You can be Tier 1 and Tier 2 at the same time. That means you're receiving your general instruction and receiving interventions for a specific skill. You can be Tier 1 and Tier 3. You're receiving your general classroom instruction, but you're receiving intensive instruction at that Tier 3 level. So there's additional time and support being built into the school day for those students that are missing that holes. In the past, some school systems, some schools are better at this than others. Rutherford County is very good. I can point out one statistic that shows how effective we've been in the past. In 2003, 14.4% of our students in Rutherford County were special ed students. 14.4%. 2013, 10 years later, it's 11.4%. First time in the history of Rutherford County we're reducing special ed numbers in Rutherford County. Now, you think 3% reduction doesn't sound like much. Once again, 3% of 41,000. 12, what's that, about 1,200 students? You take 1,200 students, and that sounds like a big number, but let you understand the full gravity of that number. Our special ed teachers serve about 25 students. To divide 1,200 by 25, that's 48 teaching positions that we are not required to fill today because of the practices we have in our 46 schools. This is even more intensive than that. It's the next step in the process of professional learning communities. And we'll let Mr. Duke talk to you a little bit more about this because it's his department.
Very quickly, just to go over some highlights for you on the program. If you turn to the next page, what you'll see is just kind of an overview of what RTI is. Like he said, it's response to instruction and intervention, and it's a framework and a multi-tiered level of support that gradually provides more intensive interventions to students as they struggle the farther behind they are. It's a very systematic response. It's how as a district we're going to address it. And it's really going to focus on both prevention of deficits and then early identification of issues and early identification to remedy those issues through intervention. Mr. Zago said intervening is not new for Rutherford County. We've been intervening with students for a long time, as the data he said points out. What is new for us is the framework and the streamlining of how we address these students and then the requirements from the state to make sure that the proper documentation. So as a district, we're having, and as a state, we're saying this is the guidelines we're going to follow. Here's the process we're going to use, paperwork we're going to require, parent notification we're going to require to ensure that students are having their needs addressed. So again, even though intervention is not new for Rutherford County, the state framework and how we do it in a county is.
One of the things that Mr. Duke just alluded to is the insurance of students' learning skills that we've deemed that are essential to them throughout the school year for each school year. Remember that this is a process of ensuring that student learning.
So a quick overview on the next page, of kind of a very quick overview of what the RTI framework is about. The framework from the state focuses on identifying our most at-risk students, and the state qualifies that as below the 25th percentile nationally. So we will have to give a universal screener to all of our students to identify nationally who's falling below the 25th percentile. For those students, the teams at the school are going to be required to identify what they call their most basic skill level deficit through some additional diagnostic testing. We have to create intervention plans for these students. We're going to monitor the progress of these students on a every other week basis. And then again, using that data to make decisions on whether or not the intervention is working. Currently, one of the byproducts of RTI, and I'll say it again, or I'll make it clear that RTI is a general education initiative, but a byproduct is if the interventions don't work, this is the data that will be used to begin the certification of a student with a learning disability. Currently, we use the IQ discrepancy model, which is through some testing of their IQ and their achievement test to see if that discrepancy exists. That, by legislative action, will not be allowed after July of this coming up year, and the main documentation we'll use is the documentation that's generated through the RTI framework.
The discrepancy model that Mr. Duke is speaking of means the student has to be 2 standard deviations below grade level. That's basically when you go to the hospital, you wait for a person to be terminally ill before you begin to administer any medication.
I did point out, one last point I want to say is, again, the state framework addresses students below the 25th percentile. Of course, in Rutherford County, we're committed through the PLC process, as we always have been, to ensure that appropriate interventions are for all students, even those that are above the 25th percentile, but still struggling academically. We really want to broaden our definition of interventions and making sure that every student that needs assistance, no matter where they fall, if they're not where they need to be, get those interventions that they need. And again, our PLC framework in the PLC process we're doing right now really lends itself to that. And as Mr. Zago said, this state framework is allowing us to really build on the successes we've had with that to improve student achievement. So just so you have a quick overview of what's required, because we are proposing in the differentiated pay plan that the coaches in the buildings will be part of that plan. So we wanted to make sure you had an understanding of what was going to be required for all schools by the state. We have to universally screen all students, kindergarten through 8th grade, 3 times a year. So this will be a universal screening, a test that we'll give to all students on their readiness skills for that grade level 3 times a year, at the beginning of the year, in December, and then at the end of the year. For students who fall below that 25th percentile, we're going to do additional survey level or diagnostic assessments to identify, okay, we know they're struggling in reading, but what is that main skill they're struggling with? What's that most basic block that we need to start our interventions at?
Trey, could I interrupt?
Yes, sir.
The universal screener is another one of those unfunded mandates coming from the state. As the locals are going to have to come up, as it stands right now, they're not going to fund it, but you're going to have to purchase some kind of a universal screener to do these 3 screenings a year for all of your students. So
The majority of the screeners are about $6 per student.
Just FYI to you, that's another little thing that came along with this.
Once we have those, once we have identified those students, again, school-based intervention team, which the framework calls for, will create specific student intervention plans to make those database decisions. Again, we're going to progress monitor, which basically means every other week we have to keep track and we have to monitor, are the students improving? Are they responding to the interventions we're giving them? Are they improving academically? And we monitor those every other week on that skill level deficit. That's a requirement from the mandate, that time period.
It's one thing that it's doing is forcing us to leverage our time. We're doing a very good job as a school system now of identifying students that have a need and even identifying their need and putting them in a more intensive or a place where they receive more support and time. But we're very, some schools are better than others, but we're not as good at identifying whether that intervention worked or not. So we don't know if we're leveraging our time to the fullest benefit. We are in some places, but not in others. This will give us that tool that we need to do that.
Parental contact, of course, if a child is in one of either our Tier 3 or Tier 2 intervention systems below that 25th percentile, we're required to make sure the parents know that whether or not they are progressing. Again, ultimately, if a child doesn't progress, if a child doesn't show improvements, this will be the data we use to begin the IEP process. And so it's important parents are communicated with and parents have the information all along the way. Fidelity monitoring, including direct observations, is required by the framework. Again, what we're monitoring or having to monitor on top of the normal teacher evaluation system, we have to monitor the interventions that are going on. And so this is in addition to what your principals are doing right now, just with standard teacher observations. And again, 3 to 5 times per 9-week grading period, depending on the tier of extra monitoring and observations going on.
I hope that 3 times in a 9-week period didn't escape you. Those are additional observations for all of these interventions at both Tier 2 and Tier 1. And Tier 2 happens daily in many of our schools.
Professional development obviously is required for all teachers on the specific tiers. Again, to make sure when you're looking at the state framework and what's required at Tier 3 and the level of intensity. Again, professional development is something our schools are asking for a lot of right now. What we know is if we have students who are in the middle school level, 9th grade students, who are still struggling academically with learning how to read and those basic reading skills, and we have students that are reading 3 and 4 grade levels below, at the middle school level especially and at the high school level, those teachers weren't trained and are not always equipped on the tools of actually teaching children how to break apart elementary or the text like an elementary teacher would. And so we're having to put some training in that to how do we, and the state's doing that, the state's putting a lot of training on how we teach upper grade level teachers some of the more basic reading skills on really teaching children how to crack the code of reading. And then record and data keeping for students who may eventually need SPED services. Of course, because there are requirements for the amount of data that's required before a child can be referred to special education, there are requirements with the fidelity monitoring to make sure that that's been in place. And what we don't want and what we can't have happen is every time a child leaves a school that the next school has to start over. So we have to make sure we have a clear pathway and a clear system of transferring that data from school to school, from elementary to middle school. Because again, if you have a student that's 2 or 3 grade years behind, we know that it's going to take multiple years to see if they're improving and to close that achievement gap.
This has begun in 10 of our elementary schools and 3 of our middle schools and 1 of our high schools this year. We wanted to pilot it and begin to get our feet wet in it for this entire school year before the mandate took place next year. We wanted to be ahead of the curve for it because it's the best thing to do for children.
And I like, again, to reiterate what he said, with the 10 that we're piloting, we're getting good feedback from our schools that are piloting it. It is additional work, it's additional responsibilities, it's additional time that we haven't focused that time before. But what we're hearing is, but we know more about our kids, and this is good for student learning, and our students are progressing because of it. So when it comes down to the RTI coaches, some of those key responsibilities, not all of them, I did include a draft of their job description in the back. I won't go over all of that, but I wanted to pull out a couple of key areas that these people would be responsible for. Of course, overseeing the implementation of the framework and working directly with the administration to monitor and adhere to the state plan. They're going to be the leader of that school-based team. Working with data with the PLC teams and individual teachers to plan not only instruction, but also the interventions that need to take place. Modeling effective instruction. So going into the classroom, because we know that RTI begins at Tier 1, which is just what happens in every classroom every day. And so sometimes if we have issues in that Tier 1 classroom, this coach would be available to go in and model effective instruction and work on Tier 1 issues with the teacher, not just intervention issues.
I want to elaborate on that just a little bit. Tier 1 is the standard classroom, remember that. If we don't have a solid instructional day happening in each one of those classrooms, we're going to have 50%, 60% of our students going to Tier 2, Tier 3, and we will never have the personnel to be able to effectively intervene for ineffective Tier 1 instruction. So that is very important to make sure that we're all singing, as our grandmother would say, from the same hymnal when we're in Tier 1 in those daily instructional days.
They're going to oversee and organize the progress monitoring. Again, that's that every other week documentation we have to take on these students. The universal screener will most likely, depending on which vendor we go through, have its own data entry system, so they'll be the person to help manage that at the school level. Organize and complete the required fidelity checks. So again, we knew we couldn't just ask principals to say, hey, for all of your interventions going on, you need to add 3 to 5 more fidelity checks per 9 weeks per intervention. So this person would actually assist with that, looking at the data, looking at the interventions. It's not so much a monitoring of the teaching going on, but of the intervention going on. Is it being done correctly, and is the student responding to it? Maintaining those records of intervention plans, and to see what the rate of improvement for that student is. Is the student improving? How quickly is he improving? How slowly is he improving? Is it acceptable for closing the achievement gap? And finally, to establish some systematic procedures for assisting our inexperienced or experienced and our at-risk students for teaching strategies and instructional techniques. We want to give, for those new teachers in our building, a coach in the building. So when those first few years of teaching, as part of that retaining and highly effective teachers, coaching them and making sure they're fully prepared to do the challenges of Tier 1.
What you see in front of you now is a flow chart of the flow of information, basically. Mr. Odom will provide that information to me. I send that out to Mr. Duke, the RTI Square coordinator, Lisa Bogle, the elementary coordinator, Barbara Powers, the middle school coordinator, and Amy Wise, the Title I coordinator. Those flow down to the classroom, the RTI Square Level 2 coach, which will be a person that's working here, or 2 people that are working here under Mr. Duke's guidance, down to the coaches that are at the school level. Once again, these schools need these people to perform all those other assignments that Mr. Duke just spoke of, plus helping monitor our teachers and providing good instructional role models to the teachers in the school. They go straight into the elementary, middle, and the Title I funded staff. High schools are also included in this, but we're unsure of where the state's headed with high school. Our current plan, Mr. Odom and I have discussed, is a K-9 plan, because 9th grade in our high schools is where we're losing so many of our students, or it's our last opportunity to provide intervention for them to learn to read. The difference in a child being able to read on the 6th grade level and not be able to, and I don't say that lightly, and not be able to is the difference between being able to fill out a job application and receive a job and be employed within Rutherford County. We have students that are getting out of high schools that can't do that. Have any questions for us? A lot to digest, right?
I'm sure there'll be some later.
It's very systemic, as you can see, and it has to be that way in order for it to be effective.
The RTI squared is not optional, that's state. I really do like it in the fact that it will be the way to identify students who are truly learning disabled. But what you're going to base that on is after you've done all of these interventions, if they're not successful, then you move up to the next tier. That's what we're talking about. The reason you need these coaches is the amount of data that has to be tracked for these students that are going through this process. And then sit down with the teachers and work out, you're almost forming IEPs, as we call them, individualized educational plan, for many more students than you have in the past. Because you're looking at the lowest 25% basically here, or 25% that may not be at national levels. I was with a group of superintendents a week ago going over this same thing, and the state was telling a number of them, some of them were saying, we got 40% now that'll be in the bottom 25% nationally. We won't have that in Rutherford County. But basically what the state was telling those superintendents, well, if you can't work on that, start with the lowest 10% or the lowest 15% and work towards this that you do. So it is a systematic plan for addressing the needs of students. And it's somewhat prescriptive, very similar to what a medical doctor would do based upon this reading need. If phonemic awareness is your issue, phonics is your issue, which you see a lot in the lower grades, then there are some skills that you can teach. So there are some interventions that go with that. So mainly is matching up your interventions with the students who need that intervention. So your coaches and data people like that help you pull this together. I believe we'll be better than we've ever been, but it's going to take a process to get there.
There's no doubt in my mind that we'll be better for this. And before Mr. Duke and I sit down, I want to remind you of that 1,200 students that would have been special ed, those 48 additional teaching positions we would have had to dedicate to that. You're looking at almost $3 million in salaries that those 48 teachers would demand if we had not reduced our percentages in special ed. Without a doubt, and it's very rare that I say that, this plan will continue to reduce this if we do it with fidelity. We will have less need for additional special ed teachers. I don't want to say that we want to do away with those teachers, because those teachers are going to be intervention teachers. Those teachers are needed that we have to work with our children. So don't think that we're going to lose teachers because I don't want to. We need those hands to work with our children. But it will reduce the number of certified special ed students, without a doubt in my mind.
There's something else happening, which I'm glad to see, which hasn't happened through my whole career that I can remember. You had your general ed over here, you had your Title I funds that kind of sit here, and then you had special ed, and special ed where you can't spend monies on anybody but special ed, and Title I, you can't spend it on anybody but Title I. But what's happening is now you're seeing an intermingling of this, and so you're finally seeing a process in place where these funds intermingle to reach more kids. And so, as Mr. Zago said, some of the people that's interventions are people that's already working, maybe in special education, already working in Title I. Some of the Title I people may become a coach, if they have that particular skill level and all that we're looking for in that. So it's not all new monies, it's more of an intermingling of monies
Repurposing
to
of
do
positions.
that. For example, he mentioned something that I'm sure slipped by you, because if you weren't thinking about it, we now provide facilitators to work with all of our new teachers. They serve about 70 apiece with the people that we've got as facilitator. But if we can take those facilitators some and repurpose them some, if you can put a coach in a school that's with a teacher every day and is helping them as those new teachers start out, as kids receive these screenings and need an intervention, to help them create that intervention, focus on that intervention, go in that classroom and teach a model lesson for them. We're ahead of the game rather than providing about 5 facilitators for
We
the,
have
for
one
the
facility
district.
that works with 92 brand-new teachers, 92 to Rutherford County teachers. One facilitator is responsible for seeing their needs. We only see our students 180 days. Teachers only work 200 days. Start dividing that by 92 and see how much time those teachers get. If we have that kind of person in each one of our buildings, we have no way to go but to have increased student learning.
You all right, Mr. Holliday? Good.
We're at the end.
I don't know. Mr. Oldham?
We're ready for any other questions. You can see why I said, let's do not vote tonight. Let's digest, think about, ask questions. Come back with, you can see those red bullets in there would be part of your motion that we'll have to either change or put something in place that is going to pull all of this together. So as you begin to look at that, you can see what the motion will need to include at the time we decide to do that. And I think Ms. Joyce has kind of picked a date for us to meet again. I believe it's January the 8th.
That's a Wednesday.
But please do not wait till January 7th or January the 8th. I mean, if you have something that Jeff needs to kind of run some scenarios on, cost and that sort of stuff, we need a little lead time if we can.
It's gonna be interesting to see what the dollars come out to.
You said it's interesting to see what the dollars will come out. We think we're reasonably close to revenue neutral is what was our goal. I mean, it's,
With the new revenue coming in.
yeah, if the state gives that little 1% or 1.5%.
If we're revenue neutral, then what do we today call a response to instruction and intervention coach? Because, you know, that's a new position, right?
We have many positions that are falling into those now. We have what we call academic interventionists. There are 2 in each one of our middle schools currently, but we don't have a coach positions. They're acting as individual coaches underneath the guidance of the principal or individual interventionists. So they kind of do both. And we still have facilitators here, 5 facilitators here at the office that go out and work and modeling. We have Title I coaches. We have Title I interventionists. Remember, Mr. Odom said about the intermingling of those monies. We've looked at that and looked at some of the new legislation at the federal level because we want to be careful not to get in trouble at the federal level, even though we're getting state guidance saying that we can do one thing. But we still are responsible because those are federal funds to deal with those in that way that they've laid out for us to do. That gives us some latitude based on us using these positions in other schools for those lowest at risk, defined at-risk students. So when we're defining you as the bottom 25% in that measurement that's nationally normed, that causes those to be, you know, at-risk students. So we can move those positions or change or add positions into non-Title I schools and not have to meet that 1-for-1 at the Title I school level. But we have about 57 positions that could be repurposed and streamlined into this systemic process across the county currently. I want to say, I can give you the exact number. We have, 52.1.5 positions that we can put and repurpose into these.
More than a decade ago, Rutherford County made some choices, I think wisely, to place in each middle school a math interventionist and a reading interventionist. And what those people then are still interventionists, so they fit under this RTI plan. So it doesn't take all new positions, but it certainly does repurpose and identify their task and what they have to do and provide them support to not only fit this new model, but I believe do a better job of doing the intervention. So we're obviously looking at the cost and how we can repurpose and use as much of that as we possibly can.
The this actually doesn't change any of our special education program. Once you go beyond Tier 3, the special education program that we've always had is there and would stay somewhat consistent as we've known it.
Yes, sir, but I want to redefine special ed for you. Special ed is basically our most intense intervention. I don't want it to be thought of something outside of the realm of providing the instruction, time, and support that each child needs. So instead of calling it something so separate, it's just our most intense intervention that we have available for students in Rutherford County.
I certainly understand the amount of decrease that we anticipate that we would see in special education classification. And yet at the same time, I find that there are parents who are rather protective of their IEP, and once they've got that IEP classification, they hold on to it. Would you anticipate a grandfathering type of transition?
Well, they still have to be recertified every 3 years. All the federal requirements are still there. Maybe I can explain it this way, may help a little bit better. I think it's roughly 60 to 70% of the students receiving special education service are learning disabled. We're not talking about people that are cognitively impaired. We're not talking about people that are physically impaired. All of those categories still apply.
Okay.
And anybody that certifies under those, the RTI plan addresses those basically that are learning disabled. It's the students who, for some reason, mentally, I mean, the IQ is there, mentally it's there, they're learning disabled. There's something not connecting together. And so this addresses that 60 or 70% of kids who are in special education that are really learning disabled.
That's why you point out it's really a general education program.
It's to keep more kids from getting placed in as learning disabled. If you can intervene more quickly and more effectively, then fewer students over a period of time will wind up in the learning disabled category. We'll do the interventions earlier.
What that does do, though, is eliminate that special ed teacher's position. What it does do, though, is if Mr. Sandvik's the special ed teacher and I'm a student and Mr. Duke's a student, Mr. Duke's non-certified special ed, but I'm certified special ed, I'm at his table learning how to blend sounds, but Mr. Duke needs to learn how to blend sounds as well. He can sit at the same table with a special ed teacher and learn that skill that was needed by both of us, even though he's not certified. That teacher is providing an intervention that's needed for both children regardless of their label.
Excellent.
Anybody else? I'd like to just make one comment, and if anybody else has anything else. I would like to say thank you to Mr. Odom and the staff for putting all the time in this, but most importantly, I think, I appreciate your willingness to look at the people that are already in these programs, letting them complete the programs and carry on just like they would. The biggest one of the concerns I have is from the university level. It's bound to hurt the universities. I can't really see a whole lot of reason for these people to enter these programs. And I guess that's the university's problem, but I do appreciate, and I hope the board will look at approving this grandfathering deal on these people that are already entered into programs. And I just want to throw that out. I think that's the big point.
We've got to make teaching still attractive. And there's a potential in this. If you just take the state base, if you're going to college and deciding on what you want to major in, and you start thinking, you know, I'm topped out at year 11 or so, regardless of where I am or what I do, that becomes for a young person looking at that. And so I hope this overall across the state of Tennessee does not wind up detracting some of our best and brightest people going into education, because we need them, and we're going to have to step out to make that happen.
Anybody else? All right. As Mr. Odom said, if you have any questions, contact him. and I'm sure we all have several questions, and we'll get back on this January 8th. Got work session tomorrow night at 5, and regular meeting Thursday at 5. Anything else? We're adjourned.